I challenge you to a dance-off. Hands off, no trash talk, no backwalk. On the black top, just me, you, that's all. No catcalls, no tag teams, no mascots. Right now, dance-off. Get down the floor! Get down the floor! Go! Get down the floor! Do it! Come on and get down the floor! Go!
I grab my ankle and pull it up and do that thing where I move my butt. I got the
What is LD? A group of neurological conditions that interfere with a person's learning. There are many learning disorders related to listening, speaking, reading, reasoning, and math calculations. People with learning disabilities have intelligence in the near average, average, and above average range, which is why it's not expected for them to have a disability. Prior to 1937, there wasn't really any recognition for learning disabilities. In 1937, Samuel Orton discovers dyslexia in a group of students he was observing. From the 1940s to the 1960s, most children were thought to be slow learners, with little to no help. In the 1960s, many children were classified with learning disability and were tested in a nonverbal format. In 1963, concerned parents gathered in Chicago to discuss their children's learning disabilities and what they were going to do. The late 1960s, special education rooms were opened in response to the parents in Chicago. 1970s, classifying LD into subtypes began with Eleanor Boder and many others. 1975, Public Law 94-142 passed, giving all handicapped students free and appropriate education in the least restrictive environment up to the age of 21. 1980s, less efforts towards remediating students' deficits and shifted to development. In the late 1980s, inclusion programs started. Special education students were starting to be taught in the general education classrooms. In 1990, Public Law 94-142 was reformed and renamed with Individuals with Disabilities Act, otherwise known as IDEA. In 2000, No Child Left Behind was enacted. These individuals all developed different methods for teaching reading for people who were classified with dyslexia. Really, they were the first accommodations. Causal factors are things that can cause learning disabilities. Familial factors, learning disabilities can be inherited and it's not uncommon to have multiple members in the same family with learning disability. Premature or difficult birth can increase the likelihood of learning disability. Prenatal conditions, postnatal or birth trauma, and environmental factors. Incidence factors show evidence of learning disability, but do not receive special education services because they do not show a severe discrepancy. Primary characteristics. Some primary characteristics of learning disabilities are perception and phonological discrepancies. Co-occurring conditions. ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, characterized by impulsivity, distractibility, and intrusiveness. This usually makes it hard to stay engaged in their education. Conduct disorder, which usually follows the same guidelines as ADHD, usually has a lack of respect or rights but follows the same guidelines. Tourette syndrome is inherited neurological disorder. It often leads to involuntary tics, vocal, motor, or even both. The least restrictive environment allows students to learn in an environment that best suits their education, whether that's the general education classroom, a resource room, home, or a hospital. For children under 5, the state provides programs throughout early childhood intervention team. Public schools help parents with newborns that may have a disability in counseling and many other things. While attending public school, many steps can be taken to help the child. Our brain interprets what's happening in the world around us. The central nervous system, which is made up of nerves, the brainstem, cerebellum, and the cerebral cortex, is responsible for the sensory information. The nerves pick up the information and transport it to the brain, while the brainstem is responsible for automatic functions. The cerebellum is responsible for bodily movements. The cerebral cortex helps with all conscious activity and is made up of several different lobes. The frontal lobe, the temporal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, and the cerebellum. The frontal lobe is responsible for thinking, memory, behavior, and movement, while the temporal lobe is responsible for hearing, learning, and feelings. The parietal lobe is responsible for language and touch, while the occipital lobe is responsible for sight. The brainstem is responsible for all automatic functions such as breathing, heart rate, and temperature, things that we can't control on our own. Brain injuries in the early years can affect the anatomy of the brain. People who have traumatic brain injuries may suffer from problems related to their working memory and attention, which makes it hard to learn. Injuries have been associated with higher rates of anxiety, depression, and aggression, all due to injury of the frontal lobe. Autism is a neurological disorder that severely affects a child's development. Its primary symptoms arise in the social realm, particularly with language and social interactions. Many children have distinct problems interacting with others, communicating, and maintaining socially appropriate behaviors. In the brain, with children with autism, have abnormally large white matter in the cerebellum. A study suggests that this could affect the social aspect of autism. ADHD, or Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, has been studied that children with this disorder function differently in certain areas of the brain, or atypical processing. It has also been studied that children with ADHD have different chemical balances in their brain than children without ADHD. Biochemical influences on learning. Students with deficits can be medicated. It is common for students with ADHD to be medicated on Ritalin or other stimulants. Medication can often help with attention and stronger connections to the material being learned. There are some side effects, and some may choose not to medicate, as they see their children become zombies when they're at home. Memory is being able to attend to a stimuli, encode the information about that stimuli, integrate and store that data, and be able to retrieve the data as needed. We are continually learning and storing our information. The hippocampus is seen to play a huge part in memory and a protein called the memory molecule. It has been shown in research that students with learning disabilities do take longer to retrieve the information from their memory. Although it may be difficult to understand why some students have such a difficult time with recall and memory, we may one day be able to understand exactly why they struggle much more than their classmates. Metacognition refers to the knowledge and control individuals have over their own thinking and learning. It's a process on how you choose to remember the information in a way that will help you recall it better. There are many different strategies to metacognition. All of these will help with the solidification of the information and recall of the information. Some of these strategies include note-taking, verbal self-mediation, mnemonics, mapping, and graphic organizers, such as Venn diagrams, timelines and sequence charts, and story maps. Phonological processing problems. This may be problems with spelling words, recalling the sounds of letters, or words may be difficult at any time. This is often a sign of dyslexia. Problem with reading and sounding out words is an indication that there may be a processing problem. When it comes to their child, parents have many rights. It is the intent of the law to include parents in each process of the evaluation of their child. The education department must make an effort to foster a relationship with the parent. It's a legal requirement that parents get a copy of their rights. Parents have the right to request confidential information about their child. Parents have the right to get their child assessed. Parents have the many rights regarding their child's education, and these rights are extremely important. Parents as advocates. It is often difficult to get services for children, so parents have to fight for these services. Legal groups put on training seminars, offers advocacy sheets online, and has a number of books out that list all the issues in advocacy. It is often a really hard struggle to advocate for your child and provide the best care possible, as you do have to fight for these services. When it comes to their education, students also have rights. The student has a right to due process, to be heard in self-defense, and review any documents that support charges, be treated with respect by all members of the school staff, expect a safe learning environment, received free and appropriate education, also known as FAP or FAPE, and be provided with accommodations for learning disabilities. Teachers also have rights and obligations to work in a safe environment, to be treated respectfully, to be able to teach, but they also have to follow the law. They are obligated to notify the parents before beginning the evaluation process to set up the IEP. They have to follow the IEP and realize that parents have the right to see documents and have copies of these. A behavior plan is put in place to evaluate and control students' behavior if they have trouble following rules. Parents should be notified and be involved in the planning of this behavior plan, as it will go in the IEP. Suspension and expulsion happen when the student may not be following the rules. Suspension cannot exceed 10 days. Before the 11th day, the IEP team must rewrite the behavior plan or reevaluate. Due process officer looks to see if suspension was validated. Expulsion is serious and must require the pre-expulsion IEP meeting. MET, or Multidisciplinary Evaluation Team, is the first step in determining if the child has a disability that interferes with educational performance and meets the eligibility standards for special education services. REED is the evaluation, and particularly reevaluation, typically begins with a review of existing evaluation data on the child, which may include classroom work, information from the parents, or his or her state performance on district assessments. The purpose of this is to review and decide if the existing data is sufficient to establish a child's eligibility and determine educational needs, or if additional information is needed to help the student progress. IEPT is also known as the IEP team, is the team that is responsible for completing the IEP for the student. This includes the parent, the resource room teacher, a school psychologist, or any other personnel deemed necessary in completing the IEP. The IEP, or the initial IEP, is the first IEP put in place 30 days of the evaluation meeting determining the eligibility. A transition IEP is put in place before the student turns 16 to help with post-secondary goals such as going to college or getting a job in this. An annual review of the IEP must be done every year. Changes are made accordingly, and an annual review can be requested at any point during the year by the parent. Reevaluations can be done before the year is up. And manifestation determination. The manifestation determination must occur within 10 school days of any decision to change the placement of a child with a disability because of violation or code of student conduct. The IEP team is responsible for making changes to the behavior plan during this process and must be done before the 11th day. Addendum to the IEP. An amendment or the original IEP. This is a meeting of the IEP team. Progress reporting. Recording the student's progress and relaying the progress to the parents and members of the IEP team to help the student reach their IEP goals. Due process hearing. Provides parents with the right to resolve disputes with their school district. This is under the IDEA Act.
I challenge you to a dance-off. Hands off, no trash talk, no backwalk. On the blacktop, just me, you, that's all. No cat calls, no tag teams, no mascots. Right now, dance off.